Buongiorno, buon pomeriggio. Buongiorno e buon pomeriggio. Good morning, good afternoon, sorry. Good afternoon. I'm Tabarelli, Davide Tabarelli. I'm very proud to be here to chair this final session of the conference REM 2020. REM stands for Renewable Energy Mediterranean, and this conference should have been taking place in Ravenna, not from far away from where I'm based here in Bologna. We have to make this conference through the web. I followed the previous webinar and it was extremely interesting, and it is going also today to be a very interesting session. We have a very important panelists talking with us today. I try to list them. We have Alessandro Lanza. I'm listing them according to their appearance later. Alessandro Lanza from Fondazione Eni Enrico Mattei is going to give us a presentation about the effect on the energy demand, on the energy industry of the pandemic. Also because I was forgetting that the conference today is about the effect of the pandemic and looking ahead. Therefore, we have also to make some kind of summary after the session of the last time. As you see, I'm going also to have a short presentation. After Lanza, let me see the list. We have Mondazzi, no, scusate, excuse me. We have Mastroianni, who is the Director General of the Union for Med, this organization following all the economic aspects and political aspects within the Med. Also because REM stands for Renewable Energy and the Mediterranean. Therefore, we will debate about renewable as the main driving force towards this transition. Then we will listen to Mondazzi, Massimo Mondazzi is head of this new entity created within Eni that is called Energy Evolution, where all the companies that are not directly involved in the production of gas and oil are concentrated, and where the important developments concerning the transition of this company should take place. Then Luca Dagnese from Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, an expert of the electricity industry. Now he has the responsibility within Cassa Depositi e Prestiti for investment also in the energy industry. Then Maggino, the Professor Filomena Maggino, assistant for the Prime Minister. We are very thankful also for your participation, despite all your busy times you have in this period. Maggino is assistant to the Prime Minister for this cabina, this body for the the quality of life. And we will hear about this new concept concerning economic development and sustainability. And at the end, Monica Spada, she is responsible for the Offshore Mediterranean Conference and also for Renewable Energy Mediterranean, and she will present the next development and the next conference in Ravenna next year. So my short presentation is the following one, just as an introduction. Next one, please. The first one, I want just to, with this one, to point out the strong growth of CO2 emission due to consumption of fossil fuels, constant growth until 2019, with a sudden drop due to the pandemic. And down the orange line is referred to the emissions of Italy, that is quite small, but we are part of Europe. And also, we want also to be a kind of leader in this transition. Next one, please. The next one, I'll emphasize that despite the pandemic, the heavy reliance that we have on fossil fuels is not changing a lot. Also in 2020, despite the sharp reduction of energy consumption that is affecting all primary energy sources, especially oil, we will have still close to 80% of total consumption that is referred to fossil fuels. Therefore, emissions are lower, but still important. And once we will recover from this pandemic, we will see probably a new growth. We have to do something in order to avoid this. Next one wants just to emphasize again the importance of Europe as the first area of the world where the commitment towards the transition is stronger. And we have already achieved the famous 2020 target, at least for renewable and for CO2 emission. We are far ahead compared to the 2020 target. We want to reach now a 55%, and we are heading towards a total reduction towards 2050. Extremely difficult because at the beginning it was easier to cut emission because we had all the industrial part of Eastern Europe where we had a lot of coal consumption that we cut. Now in the future it's going to be extremely difficult. Today we are going to debate what have been the effects of the pandemic and looking ahead what we can do in order to foster this transition that everybody wants. Thank you. And the next speaker is Alessandro Lanza, who is going to present us the results of an interesting research they conducted recently about the effect of the pandemic. Grazie, Alessandro. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much.
Devi unmute, ok. Il microfono devi aprire.
My video, eccolo. Thank you very much for your presentation. I will be very precise and very short, respecting the 10 minutes. Yes, we did a sort of study on the impacts of COVID-19 to the energy system and the environment up to 2030. My intention today is just to give a sort of advertising of this work because it's, as you can imagine, complex and difficult and boring to be explaining details in 10 minutes. So my point is that this is really for 3 blocks. There is an assessment, there is a pretty, say, complex energy system model. Then we can draw some analysis and some policy. Next slide, please. The presentations, long presentation of this study is here, as you see, and the research methodology is a separate paper, which is, as you see, here. I decided, if you can, next slide, please. However, I took some results on recent publication that basically are published in October. One is the World Energy Outlook 2020, which has been published 2 weeks. And then some other results from the International Monetary Fund that has been published yesterday. Now, I think this is interesting in terms of energy demand, global energy demand. I have some problem with colors. I color blind, so sometimes I refer to left or right because simply I cannot say red or blue. Okay, so on your left there is a average annual GDP growth. The first bar refers to the previous scenario of the International Energy Agency on an average growth between 2019 and 2030. Which in the previous scenario was 3.5%, which is not the largest we got, which is not the lowest. It's a sort of if you take the last 100 years, we are more or less on a very long transition. Of course, we 2019 didn't not include COVID, so they made two in this new outlook. They made two different hypotheses. One is with the, I presume is a blue bar, the so-called state policy scenario. That basically means a sort of business as usual. So this is a pre-shock, this is post-shock. And basically they say that if you are in a business as usual scenario, the average growth will be lower than 0.5%, so half point, okay? Instead of 3.5 is around 3. Now, there is a, 0.5% can be seen as a low number, as a big number, because the exponential in 10 years of substantial difference of 0.5% is, at the end of the day, it's a big number. Then they made a second scenario that I think is interesting, which is so-called delayed recovery. So if you just take it easy, if you do not prepare what is important to be prepared as fast as we can, this delayed scenario has a different shape. On your left side, on your right side, you can see the result in terms of energy demand. The WIO was basically the scenario behind the WIO 2019 was basically a straight line. The state policy scenario, as known as business as usual, has a pretty so-called V recovery. There is a long discussion on this, the V recovery, W recovery, U recovery, L recovery. This is a typical V recovery. In macroeconomic terms means that you can see by yourself there is a short, there is a shock and then a quick recovery. And basically the dot is giving you an idea about when we will see the result we got in 2019. So in the state policy scenario, we will see the result we had in 2019 in terms of energy demand in 2022, more or less. While in the delayed recovery scenario, we are around 2025. So the energy demand is affected by the COVID system. Probably is much more clear considering the effect on energy demand than on GDP. However, I will show some other results. The next slide, please. This is a very quick slide. This is referred to global energy demand, global oil demand by scenario. Again, the dotted line is the WIO 2019. The first one is the V reaction of the business as usual scenario. The second line is the so-called delayed recovery scenario. And then this time there is a new one, which is interesting from my point of view because, as usual, I don't agree with David every time. We know each other since long time ago.
Since we were children.
Yeah, more or less. So I disagree. The problem is as follows. There is this so-called sustainable development scenario, which is the one which is, let's say, compatible with the IPCC assumption on how much we can get or how much we can afford in terms of further emissions. If you want to respect the 1.5 degree more than average, which was in past years. So if you wanna be, and of course this is again, it's not a forecast, it's a scenario. So it's something to say, are we serious about climate change? Because if you are serious about climate change, oil demand should follow more or less this path. This is of course 2030. I will just show you, or I will just underline the fact that today, which is the end of the first line, green, I don't know, the first part of the line, the straight line, it's around 100 million barrels per day, which is a sort of, holy grail for oil industry. Now, with a sustainable scenario, in 2030, it will be around 87. So in 10 years, there will be a very sharp reduction of oil demand. This is again, it's not a prediction, it's just a scenario. However, next slide, and I'm going to finish. mala tempora currunt, sorry for the Latin instead of English. If you see the column number 2.
Please translate it, Alessandro, from Latin.
No, mi rifiuto. Mala tempora currunt cannot be translated. So it's bad times are ahead of us, okay? If you take the second color, this is a GDP growth, this is history, okay? GDP growth for advanced economies. In 2019, we grew 0.3%. And it was really an awful increase in the sense, the worst among all numbers in the column, okay? And of course, this is pre-COVID. We were just not very efficient, okay? Then we were not the last one in the first column because Japan was performing worse than us. So 0.3 for Japan, we were 0.8 in 2018. The problem is that then in 2020, this was released yesterday by International Monetary Fund. The idea is that the projection for, and this is not scenarios, these are projections, they are models and so on. The idea is that apart from Spain, we will be the worst among advanced economies. With the collapse of our GDP in 2020, which is more than 10 percentage points, so it's 10.6 minus 10.6. And if you prefer even worse, Spain is performing very badly. However, the 2021, which is the V story, so the number that we recover is that we will recover by 5.2, while Spain, which is 7.2. So let's say the first 2 years ahead of us are probably complex years. And I mentioned just this number on World Economic Outlook projection simply because we know and everybody knows that every discussion about energy market and energy system cannot be seen alone without mentioning simple macroeconomic numbers. Thank you very much.
The very bleak picture, this one, but there might be some positive effects. I'm referring to the lower emissions that I showed before, of course, but we will discuss later on if the huge amount of expenditure, for example, in Europe, but also the strong recovery of China, as well as the next presidential election in the United States could trigger a sudden boost of the world economy. Anyway, now it's up to Mastroianni from the Union for Med to present what's going on in the Mediterranean area concerning the transition. Of course, Italy is part of Europe. Europe is far ahead in the attempt to make a real transition. The problems in the southern part of the Med and the east part of the Med are different. There are more urgency concerning energy demand and the development of new resources. And yes, it is interesting to hear about how politics and economics are dealing also with the pandemic. Thanks, Mastroianni.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you can hear me well from Barcelona, which is the seat of the Union for the Mediterranean, an international organization with 43 member states, all the members of the European Union and all the other states around the rim of the Mediterranean Sea. I think I can counterbalance because I will try to give a picture that makes this big crisis, above all, as a big opportunity. But to understand it, you will allow me a couple minutes theory without which our vision and our action becomes incomprehensible. Starting in 2015, it is well known that in 2015, there was some sort of revolution in the understanding of economics and governance called the 2030 Agenda. Basically, what happened is that we started to give value to global balance beyond merely economical aspects. What does it mean? It means that up to then, we concentrated on one value, which is development or growth, considering basically that it could only be achieved to the detriment of other values, which make up global balance. Global balance is the resultant of the interaction of many sub-balances that can be in turn summed up in four macro areas, which is development, environment, human rights, and growth. What we thought up to 2015 is that development to a certain extent structurally could only be achieved to the detriment of those other values. Suddenly in 2015 we understood that in global balance there is no trade-off, there is a synergy in the achievement of these four very important values. And this is what we try to apply as a Union for the Mediterranean to the area around our sea. But when in 2015 this new vision was adopted, very few people thought that it would become realistic. And we had a very important proof that it's working, and it's working well, exactly with COVID. Something happened at the beginning of this year, that is that the European Union adopted a new strategy for the environment called the Green Deal. And then, as though the Murphy's Law was playing at its hardest, there came the pandemics. First reaction, according to the old mentality that opposed one value to the other, was, oops, we wanted to take care of the environment, but now we have other priorities. So we have to take care of health, we have to take care of recovery. We cannot afford devoting too many resources to trees, butterflies, and little birds. But it only took a very short time to understand that there is no trade-off. You want a recovery which is sound and sustained, and you want it to be health protective, then it needs to be green. So applying all this, which has always been our vision, to the Mediterranean, we have to take into account some interactions which are basic. The first one is that the Mediterranean is a climate hotspot. Global warming over the Mediterranean is progressing 20% faster than the global average. And this comes with predictions which are not really comforting. We're expecting in a few years 250 million people to be in water scarcity. We're expecting huge fires, we're expecting storms, we're expecting sea level to rise very quickly, up to 1 meter before the end of the century, and even 25 centimeters in a few years. Nobody is scared by 25 centimeters of water rising, but only if they forget that it is not only a matter of vulnerable seas like Venice on the coast. It's 25 centimeters of salty water that enters into the lands and makes agriculture impossible. If you consider that 42% of the population around the shore is around the shore, and that more than half of the agricultural production is around the shore, you understand how serious the situation is. 25 centimeters of sea level rise could salinize the delta of the Nile and jeopardize the agriculture of a country that has roughly 100 million people, with a lot of consequences on peace and security. But there again, what we have to think is that there is no trade-off with other values, especially there is no trade-off with another urgency we have in the Mediterranean. There is a huge asymmetry between strong communities and vulnerable communities, which can be described in terms of international exchanges. Just consider that of all exchanges around the Mediterranean, 90% occurs among North Rim states, 9% between the north and the south, and only 1% among South Rim states. This gives you a picture of how it is. So how do we move an essential variable like energy into this picture, which is a picture of extreme danger? Asymmetries are fueling never-ending conflicts. Climate change can amplify them. Energy is obviously a part of the puzzle. how do we move around it? Our vision is that the time has come to forget old ideological opposition, trade-offs between energy considered as a commodity and energy considered as an enabler of human and social rights. In this sense, what we try to apply is the idea that not only society's justice, gender equality can be moved, but also the market can be accelerated if we take the approach which is deepest inside the 2030 agenda, which is no one left behind. So of course, we have to rely on the great markets. We have to rely on gas as a transition mechanism, but above all, renewables for the real territories, renewables for the real communities. There is some friction between consolidated rights and visions and this approach. For instance, when we see the value of off-grid renewables distributed to sparse communities, and we know how much opposition there is in there. There are some frictions whenever we talk about interconnections among the various national grids and this kind and these kinds of necessities, which are absolutely basic for the functionality of renewables. This is true, but we're trying to overcome them. To do that, we are organizing 2 ministerial meetings, gathering the 43 ministers of environment first, and then the 43 ministers of energy right afterwards. The first one in Egypt and the second one in Evora, close to Lisbon, in March and April. And we are trying very strongly to link these 2 aspects so that energy becomes an engine of growth while at the same time providing social protection and becoming an opportunity to produce income out of a sound environment, which in turn will give us a protection of the #1 global value that we are visualizing now, which is health. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Of course, these meetings are expected to be held next year, March and April 2020.
March and April next year.
Okay, okay, very interesting. And how many countries? You said 43.
43 countries, all the countries of the European Union and the European Union, plus all the other countries around the rim of the Mediterranean.
Okay. Very crowded meeting, of course, because
and very difficult ones.
Yes. Okay. Thank you very much. The next to speak, if I'm not wrong, is Massimo Mondazzi, who is head of the part of the company that has been created that is called the Energy Evolution. I heard also in the past few years an energy new solution. That is another story. I suppose it is part of now this new entity. Massimo Mondazzi is at the forefront of this struggle that the energy industry, especially the oil and gas companies, are trying to accomplish in this transition, trying to putting together the need to satisfy the investors. And sorry to remind you, the others, Massimo, you are coming from the financial sector. You were chief financial officer of Eni for a long time. Therefore, you had to deliver yields to investors. And at the same time, the oil companies, especially the oil and gas companies, but not only them, but also electricity power companies, have to be the forerunner of this transition. And you are in charge of this attempt. I do not envy you, therefore, please try to tell us something about this attempt.
Thank you very much, Davide, and good afternoon, everybody. Just to answer you, I would say that I really enthusiastic about the new role, because I definitely feel the challenge of this very challenging period that is quite unique. I am 57 years old. In Eni, so in the energy industry since a long period of time. But even looking at the previous period, we never, at the worldwide, we never saw such such a tough period, or more than tough, reshaping period in the oil and gas industry or in the energy industry. That has been for a long period of time stable. There have been some crises, but temporary crises, not putting in jeopardy the overall system, but creating some disruption, temporary disruption that has been always recovered in a quite short period of time. Now the story seems to be a bit different. So we are talking about transition. Transition now is quite clear. My colleagues speaking before, I say, explain quite well, which are some of the push making this market moving towards different solutions. And the challenge is, as someone said, to put together and to create the right coexistence between the economic sustainability of a business together with the environmental one. And to do this and to reach the quite difficult and quite challenging target that we have in front of us. Alessandro remembered the 55-60% CO2 emission reduction that is the European target versus 1990. Definitely you must be very creative, but at the same time very practical in your approach. So using everything you have in your hands to move towards such a target, and adding on something in addition that could come from the existing technology or maybe the new technology. So this is exactly the spirit of this new division inside Eni called Energy Evolution. So even the name gives the sense of what we are looking for. So based on our knowledge, our competencies, our asset, the idea would be to move towards this new target, some way reinventing even the existing business, using the same capability and added on additional businesses and technologies. So this is the sense. So inside this organization, we have refining and marketing, we have the chemical business, we have retail gas and power, renewables, power, and every business have already inside this portfolio something new. So I'd like to remember the green refinery, the biorefinery that now are a reality, and then has been probably the first in the worldwide market to set up a biorefinery. We have now 1 million ton capacity in 2 sites, one in Venice and one in Gela in Sicily, producing HVO, so hydrogenated vegetable oil. That is really, I would say, the real example of a transition in this path towards the full sustainability. This is a fuel from vegetable or from recycled product, so definitely really sustainable. We are talking about a feedstock that starting from 2023 would be palm oil free, so without any sort of competition with the food industry and the food agriculture. That if used with the existing cars, I would say the Euro 6, Euro 5 models, would be in the position even to emit less CO2 full life, full cycle. So we say from well to wheel, less CO2 than an electric vehicle, because definitely the electric vehicle contribute to a larger share of emission when the batteries are generated and when the batteries should be dismissed at the end of the process. All these issues are not present when you have to set up a traditional car that's using HVO, the hydrogenated vegetable oil, will emit while running exactly the same CO2 that has been captured by the vegetable plantation when they grew up. So this is a very interesting technology, a very interesting project that should be spread, diffused together with the electric vehicle, because I said before that dealing with such a very tough targets that we are giving to ourselves, mainly in Europe, you have to use everything available to finally succeed. And definitely what we can see is that comparing what the pace of what we are doing versus the original projection in terms of, I would say, electric vehicle diffusion, or maybe the growth in the renewable capacity, all of them are running behind the schedule. So being realistic and considering the increase in the sustainable target, what we have responsibly do is to find out additional, by definition, to push more and more in getting what has been, I would say, designed and what has been envisaged since the beginning, but at the same time to find out additional levers to tackle and to reach exactly the target that has been set. And this is, I would say, one of the best example I could tell you and to refer to that we can contribute having the portfolio that we have. So a biorefinery is a refinery that can be set up using the same knowledge, sometimes the same facility previously used for a traditional refinery. So even in terms of timeline, you don't have to wait for technology breakthrough or to set up different capabilities to get there, but it's something that you could do quite immediately. We have 1 million ton of capacity already in place. Another example of what we can do using our previous competencies in reaching the target is the example of the blue products in parallel together with the green one. So a blue product is a decarbonized product such as electricity or hydrogen that is really a fashionable item today. So a decarbonized product thanks to the carbon capture. So this is definitely a way to reach the target that we are looking for together with the green one that every country is using when they are in the position to do so. And definitely what you need is to have depleted reservoir available in order to inject the CO2. So it's something that the UK is doing, Norway is doing. So all the countries that are producing and used to produce hydrocarbon in the past. The same is happening in Italy when we have a significant capacity offshore Ravenna. So definitely close to the original site of this convention. And we are talking about something in the range of 3 to 500 million of tons of CO2 of capacity. That means really a meaningful tools to complement the availability of blue decarbonized energy in order to get the 55–60% reduction target, CO2 reduction target that is our target. To do so, we have to be very realistic. We don't have to fight for an ideologic war saying that green is better than blue or something like that, because hydrogen, decarbonized hydrogen is a decarbonized hydrogen. So the product and the final effect is exactly the same, with the difference that all along the path, looking at maybe how to achieve different stages in progress towards the final result, you should get advantage from the product that are really available now, and then work for the additional availability or more green or more evoluted product forward. This is exactly the same, the case of the hydrogen. So now hydrogen, the blue hydrogen, using the example that we are working on in Italy, will cost probably 3.5 times less than the green one, while the green one has even the negative that today the renewable energy is mainly used definitely to reduce the carbon content in the energy production. So using the same source of energy to produce a different product would mean to reduce the pace in the decarbonization process that has been envisaged at the beginning. So reality, just to conclude, Davide, reality, pragmatism, a rational way to act, grounded of what you have, using what you have, reshaping your capabilities in order to help the overall process, together with a constant effort in R&D. So in order to find out additional tools, additional techniques, to find out new ways to reduce the carbon content of the energy, put them to zero, or maybe even some breakthroughs such as the nuclear fusion, just to talk about what could be available maybe in a few years' time. Are definitely
because you are in a
use.
project with the MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, concerning fusion. That is the most prestigious project around the world, at least, to announce this one. Okay. So thank you, Massimo. Extremely interesting. I have several questions. There is no time, but we will see. About questions, I want to remind you, to all participants, we have a large number, probably the highest, for I'm very glad, the highest number of attendees to one of these conferences. We are 172. In order to receive questions, you can send them clicking on the box Q&A. I will read and select them also if there are too many of them. Now it is up to Luca Dagnese. Luca Dagnese is Director General of Cassa Depositi e Prestiti, a holding company who has a lot of activities, especially in this strategic sector that is energy, along with SNAM, Terna, the two transmission system operator in gas and electricity. He has the highest share of ENI and Enel as well. So they are in the best position to strategically direct the investments. And he is going to talk about investment, the financial sector, and the willingness there is in the financial sector to invest in the transition. I want also to underline that Dagnese comes from the electricity industry. He knows a lot about the electricity system. And this is important also because the future of the energy sector, of any kind of energy consumption, production, is more electricity. This is a long-lasting trend that we started more than 100 years ago. And I'm very, very interested to hear what Luca Dagnese is going to say. Grazie, Dagnese, a lei.
Thank you, Davide, and good afternoon, everyone. My talk, as was underlined before, will be about how the energy transition is fundamental as a driver of investment. I will have a perspective focused on Italy, as is the main focus of our institution, and also link this to the pandemic in the sense that, of course, investment is a fundamental element of the growth of GDP and the restart of the economy that all countries are targeting, getting out of this acute phase of pandemic. So we have the two themes of energy transition and pandemic linked very strongly one to another through investment, which we see as the important task that we have to manage if we want to reach our targets as a country in terms of carbon footprint reduction. So going to first slide, we can observe how we look at the investment outlook for Italy for the next 10 years. This is not necessarily what we will do by investment, but this is what we should do as a country. So we are projecting investment needs measured in terms of what we lack in terms of investment and infrastructure in order to renew our infrastructure to reach our targets in decarbonization. And we see that the energy sector, mainly through the left-hand side of this chart, but also through specific contribution in decarbonizing transport and improving the energy efficiency of public sector infrastructure like school, hospitals, healthcare, is actually responsible for more than half of the total investment that we as a country have to make in order to upgrade our infrastructure over the next 10 years. So energy transition is really key for investment. What we should do, and we will see in the next slide, in order to achieve these ambitious targets, we have grouped the really tens and dozens of different areas of investment into 3 major targets and 6 specific investment initiatives. Because if we look at the next 10 years, we may see that the most important things that we have to do is first focus on the initiatives that will have a major reduction impact on CO2 by 2030. And these are basically developing renewable sources and expand energy efficiency. We may also focus on other initiatives that have a very important impact on other sustainability parameters, like, for example, the quality of air in our cities or the way we recycle our waste, and also have a positive effect on energy transition, although their CO2 contribution is not as big as the first 2. But we cannot stop at this point, but also we have to prepare for what's going to happen over the next 20 years, because the targets for 2050 are much more ambitious, as has been already underlined, than those we have in 2030. So we have to prepare to the next transition, and this includes investing in making possible the transition of private mobility to green by having a combination of alternative fuels and electricity and deploying the distribution infrastructure for these fuels, but also preparing for the transition to hydrogen. That was underlined. It's a very fashionable topic today, but what we are underscoring is that in order to have hydrogen in the next, in the 20 years that started from 2030, we have to prepare for the investment already today. Next slide, we'll start with the focus on these key things. First, about renewables. I will focus on 2 numbers, because these are really, to me, the most important thing. If we want to reach our target in terms of renewable contribution as outlined in the Piano Nazionale Energia e Clima, which is the national plan for climate and energy, we have to get to a level of investment of 4 gigawatts per year of renewable. Unfortunately, the last years have seen only 1/4 of that level. This means that we need to make a substantial acceleration, and this substantial acceleration will not be driven by more money, but will be driven by the ability to develop better projects, which means simplify permitting, having extended market mechanism, sustain innovation, and allowing repowering of existing plants. Energy efficiency, which is the next slide topic, is also something that needs to be accelerated. If we move to next page, we can see how this is going to be much more important in terms of investments in the market for this activity, especially, and this is interesting, driven by public sector, which is the one that has been investing the least over the last years. So it's very important that this area of our economy will keep the pace of industry, which is the one which has been the most advanced in energy efficiency, and the residential sector, which has a huge potential. Something is already being done. The incentives are in place. Especially the public sector need to find new approaches so that it speed up the design phase of this project. The private-public partnership, as we see, as a key element of this. Next slide will be focusing on one of these things that are not so big in terms of carbon, but are very big in terms of quality of our life, which is public transport. This is a very hot topic in the post-COVID environment here in Italy, also because we have to increase our capacity, and there is no better way to increase our capacity than to replace the existing fleet, which is very old, as we can see. Even 42% are less than Euro 3 in terms of environment certification, and we can combine incentives which are there, which can be even expanded with the recovery fund, with the necessity to expand our fleet and bring immediately to into our roads new type of fuels. Again, these new fuels, whether they are electricity, gas, or hydrogen, need new infrastructure. And again, the public-private partnership is a key element of promoting this investment in infrastructure. Next slide will be a snapshot of the preparation of green hydrogen. In this, we see that the blue and the green component that Massimo was referring to of hydrogen do really have a synergistic interplay among the two. Because what we see is that today, green hydrogen is very expensive. This is something that everyone is telling, while blue hydrogen may have an opportunity of filling the gap of the demand of hydrogen until we reach levels of cost for green production and an energy mix in producing electricity, which is fully green and renewable. In the meantime, we can leverage our capacity in our depleted reservoirs, as was underlined before, in order to fill the gap, and use that capacity in order to be filled by CO2 that is produced by these blue processes as our green processes get more and more competitive. So rather than a complete parallel development of these two areas, we see a time interplay between the two. And we have to prepare the hydrogen world by investing actually in both. Finally, let's go in the next slide to what is the problem of how these investments are kept, in some cases, at a lower level than what we need, and how we can solve that. As we said, the problem is not money, is not investment. Investors in equity are willing to go into that sector. Lenders like CDP, but also commercial lenders are really willing to put money in that. The problem is boosting the availability of attractive projects. So we have to simplify permitting, first and foremost, especially in Italy. We have to work a little bit and fine-tune the remuneration mechanism. We have to make our public sector really an investment driver by using much more aggressively the public-private partnerships. And we should also implement system to coordinate these things at the national level, especially on one side by monitoring the progress in various areas, but also to allocate the funds of the recovery fund and investment to the most attractive investment proposals. Next slide is about what we as Cassa Depositi e Prestiti are planning to do. Traditionally, we were a financing area only focused on financing and mostly in mobility and transport, the traditional infrastructure made by the states and by the concession holders. We have expanded our targets and our operations across sectors, including all these sectors of the transition, energy, environment, but also by implementing different ways of operating, also advising our traditional partner, the public sector, but also investing in equity into joint ventures with companies in the private sector to bring that opportunities to the public sector, to the municipality, to the local authorities that are our traditional clients. We are doing this, and this is next slide, and I'm finally concluding this, through a series of joint ventures. Many of them have the logo of our friends of ENI. We are working with them on renewables, on ways to fuel, many of these things that Massimo was underlined before. We are studying alongside with them, but also with other companies within our group, SNAM, on energy efficiency, on gas deployment in ports, and also, of course, the industrial companies, Ansaldo and Saipem, within our the range of companies we are a shareholder into. So we think that the combination of the industrial capacity of these players, our financing, but also and especially our direct relationship with the public sector can actually give an additional acceleration to many of these initiatives I was underlying, which represent actually the most important part of the transition, much above the money, which is much talked about in newspapers, but is not really the key element of that. And with this, I finish. Thank you very much for your attention.
Grazie, grazie Luca, molto very interesting. You have so many projects to follow, but the transition is also in your hands. You have to direct these investments, and I suppose you are going, but we'll discuss maybe later on, to have a role in deciding and in certifying also the fact that the new investment, all the money that is coming from the European Union, could be directed in this kind of investments. So now it is up to Filomena Maggino. She is professor of statistics at the University of La Sapienza in Rome. But as I said before, she is more important assistant to the Prime Minister in this period during this government. That is likely to last also in the next 3 years, for this body that is called Cabina, this body per la qualità della vita, for quality of life and sustainable development issues. And therefore it is extremely interesting both for her position as assistant to the government, and for the themes, the issues she is expert of, that are so important for the energy industry for us as economists, so stuck to the concept of GDP, of PIL, of constant growth of GDP. Now it's up to you. I look forward to hear from you kind of a lesson also for us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and also for inviting me in this very interesting event. And of course, I will not be a professor in this occasion. I would like to avoid this kind of behavior. Anyway, I'm counselor of the Prime Minister since the beginning of his appointment, the first appointment. And my involvement was in the field of quality of life, well-being, sustainable development, and also statistics, of course. And our idea since the beginning was in which way we can introduce these topics in the government actions. These topics are really complex, and complexity needs to be respected. In which way? You have to respect the idea that you you should not act by sectors. You should act by coordinating all the sectors, because any action in one sector has, in terms of well-being, a consequence in the other sectors. And in the field of government, sectors are actually ministries. And that's why we decided, and the Italian Prime Minister, President Conte, decided to build up this control room, and we called it Benessere Italia, Well-being Italy, just translated. And the idea is to coordinate all the ministers. That's why the control room is composed by all the trustees of all the ministers. And then behind we have also a scientific committee composed by all the presidents of the main public research institutes in Italy. Well, this is a horizontal coordination, but the control room has also a vertical coordination. That's why the control room is face also international organizations like the European Committee, OECD, of course, also the United Nations. By the way, OECD defined the control room as a best practice in managing the 2030 agenda. But also, of course, the territorial institutions, regions and municipalities, and so on. Well, the Prime Minister announced his intention to build up this control room in February 2019. And then we needed to prepare all the organization in order to, all the bureaucratic organization in order to build up the control room. But since the beginning, my phone call, my telephone at Palazzo Chigi starts to ring up, and I received hundreds of phone calls from stakeholders from the territory, not because they wanted to be included in this architecture, but because they identified this control room as the right place in the palace where to share their work, also where they could share the vision of the country, the vision of the fair and sustainable well-being.
Professor, can you give us and me in particular an example of one of the most interesting one of these stakeholders?
Stakeholders are just an example, Fincantieri. And just one example as one of the most known.
And the issue
but also small research centers, associations, foundations. We made 360, but then we stopped counting them because there were too much. So we decided to stop. But the idea is not to ask, because anytime a stakeholder is received at Palazzo Chigi is something related to some that they want to ask. But they give us something. They give us the idea that they could have some action on the territory, and they want to share the idea that they were doing that in the same direction. And the direction, the shared direction is the fair and sustainable well-being. In some sense, we are introducing in the palace a sort of a revolution in the mentality of the ministers or in the government in general, which means being coordinated in the policy action, also in very small action, which should be coordinated in order to reach the same goal. Well, after all those meetings with stakeholders, we also were able to identify the fragility of our country. In terms of our goal, which was fair and sustainable well-being. The fragility were then declined in terms of programmatic lines. And we shared with the Prime Minister those lines, and he decided to present publicly present all those lines, the 5 lines, in January, last January. The 5 lines are this: regeneration, fair and sustainable regeneration of the territories. Since we believe that strictly talking about regeneration of cities is very limited. All the territories should be regenerated. Mobility and territorial cohesion. Quality of life as a big recipient, where to develop programs, actions addressing the individual lives in terms of food, in terms of education, standards of living, and so on and so forth. Circular economy, and last but not least, energetic transitions. In which term, all these topics that I listed before are, maybe some of them are sectorial, like energy, but the decision that we have to take in this perspective should be shared by all the ministers, because for their strategic consequences on the country life. Well, as I said before, those programmatic lines were presented by the Prime Minister in January. Then we know what happened after that. But we reflected a lot because we had time, because we were locked down. But all our reflections were able to show us that those programmatic lines were exactly those that we had to push and to propose to the country after the health emergency that we lived. This was the first reflection. The other was that actually we lived a very serious emergency, especially because in the past the political decision didn't consider citizens' lives at the center and at the goal of their actions. And we know why, because in the north of Italy, just to make an example, the north of Italy is the more polluted in Europe. Yeah, that area is the more polluted in Europe, and we cannot.
Oh, valley.
Yeah, exactly. And we cannot think that people living in such an environment can afford such an epidemic emergency with their body. Just a small example. And we can also add other observation about that. That allowed us to conclude that we should reorient all the political programs in the direction of the citizens' well-being. And we restarted to work, especially during the lockdown, by adopting those guidelines and in some sense making them more practical. So we started to have some working groups on, for example, food, which is one of the most important issues, allowing people to afford, for example, this situation. But not only, for example, another working group is devoted to the remodelation of the territorial service for the citizens, not only health services, but also social services as a unique system. So we are working in this perspective with all the, also with all the stakeholders, not only with the ministers. Then the Prime Minister appointed me also in the famous committee guided by Colau. And now the Prime Minister asked me to review the guidelines for the National Restarting and Resilience Plan. And we are working on that. Even because we should avoid, in this, especially in this moment, to start with a lot of projects with no coherence among them, and the crucial coherence that we should adopt in our country as a country view is really the citizens' well-being. We will adopt any programs addressing the environment, especially if we are talking about the citizens' well-being. They are not two different words, environment and citizens. They are all together. And this is just to explain also the philosophy that we would like to adopt, that we are adopting in this context.
Yes, extremely interesting, Professor Magino, and I thank you for this introduction, this explanation. I heard
no, thank you for giving me this opportunity.
No, yes, we have a large part of people want this kind of approach to the economy, and maybe it's our fault as traditional economists, and also Alessandro Lanza. The others are not economists, except maybe Massimo. But it's our fault that we do not explain, or we didn't manage. I have to say that Fondazione Mattei, Enrico Mattei, started back at the end of the 80s, in 89, as Alessandro told me before, in dealing with issues about growth, sustainability, all other aspects. Ok, ragazzi, siamo corti come si arriva sempre. As always, we arrive at this point that is we are running short of time. Now, I make a round of questions, starting again from Lanza. What about, I mentioned before, a very short question and very quick answer in order to finish by 4:30 and leave the floor to Monica and to the short presentation about Ravenna. Alessandro, tell me something about China. They have recovered. They are dealing with this pandemic in a much better way compared to us. Can we rely also on them for a boost to the economy?
Yes.
Very short. Okay. But they are not democratic. This is the problem of citizenship.
You know, the idea, the problem is most of the time we tend to keep together China and India. As a matter of fact, the story now is India and not China anymore. If you want, India will be the next, is actually the China of 20 years ago, with a difference, as you said, rightly pointed out. India is a democratic place that in the long run means something.
Bello, bello, mi è piaciuto questo. Grazie Alessandro. Democrazia.
You're welcome.
But anyway, we have not to speak about these issues that could be quite delicate. Mastroianni, in fact, about politics. We are concerned, as you know, about migration. How to give opportunity, thanks also to energy, to the southern part of the Mediterranean to grow stronger, to have their own development. How can we do something? I'm going to increase the temperature in my room in order to consume more gas coming from Algeria, but and Libya as well. But I suppose that is not enough.
Rebalancing the economies is essential to fight climate change, to adapt to climate change. And concerning energy, there is one first thing we absolutely have to do, which is interconnections. Interconnections between the north and the south, because maybe somewhere there is the technology and in other places there are the resources, but above all, and it is a little bit more difficult, interconnections south-south. Because if we want to have them grow also through the development of renewables, they have to rely on the backup of traditional grids. But this cannot be handled only on a national perspective. So we need to foster interconnections. We have market resistance. I mean, we cannot lie to ourselves, but this is the direction we are pushing as much as we can.
Grazie, Mastroianni. Next one for Massimo Mondazzi. Very provocative. I apologize. Please give me a comment about the decision of BP, British Petroleum, or Beyond Petroleum once, to cut so much of the investment in oil and gas, about the fact that the reaction from investors has not been so good.
More than a specific comment or maybe even a criticism on what BP did, my comment would be that the future is so plenty of newity and uncertainty that you must remain very flexible, betting on the asset that you have. So flexibility will be the most important lever. So how fast your oil and gas production should decline, and how fast the alternative energy should grow would depend on technology, market prices, and so forth. So having such a flexibility, and you have more flexibility if you have different levers at your disposals, the better it is. So this is, I would say, the any approach on this, and then maybe BP is envisaging now a strong decline, but let me say that maybe in 1 year's time they could say something different. So what is most important, what you do, than what you say or what you can announce now for the years to come.
Okay, grazie Massimo. And Luca, sei ancora, scusami, Luca Dagnese.
Yes, I'm here.
The ending slide you showed all these different companies, especially in the energy sector, of which I am supposed to be an expert. Don't you think that there is a growing role of the state that is a little bit large compared to the market, the need? So it seems that the state is regaining a position in our economy that is not too different compared to the rest of the world, also especially in Europe, compared to France, and most of all compared to China.
Well, in a way, you are pointing to the fact that, especially because of the pandemic, the role of the state is expanding, not just in Italy, but everywhere. Actually, what we want to do in Cassa Depositi e Prestiti is a little bit of the opposite, in the sense that all these initiatives are actually meant as purely private companies aiming at profits, at growth, at their market objectives. And by the fact that we act as an investor in them and we are trusted by institutions, they are actually bringing some of the private company expertise and some of the private company skills to the public sector. So that's, for example, the emphasis we had on this public-private partnership is much more about not just having money from the private sector, but having the private sector being able to supply the public sector with engineering skill, with entrepreneurial skill, with the ability to get things done. So in a way, it's true that the pandemic is accelerating and expanding the role of the state, but what we see as a key of this transformation is a lot more cooperation between the state and the private sector.
Okay, grazie Luca. Next question for Magino. After your presentation, how do you measure the effects of the decision-making process of policymakers? And I'm especially thinking about the next huge commitment that the policymakers, especially I suppose your friend Prime Minister, has to tackle in the next few days about how to spend, how to convince Europe that we deserve 209 billion euros, how to measure then the effects on 4 priorities, among the 5 there is the energy transition. So I'm glad of this centrality. I'm glad to hear this quality of life, and the problem how to measure them, the effects.
Well, Italy has an important project which has 10 years, is 10 years old right now, which is the project made by ISTAT, the Italian National Institute of Statistics, and the CNEL, the Italian Council on Labor and Economics. This project provides us with a very huge system of indicators covering all the domains of our country. Of course, after 10 years, maybe we should reorganize it, make it more daily, but this is a very crucial point from which we can start. In terms of guidelines for the National Restarting and Resilience Plan, of course, we should add something in this moment, but I would keep the idea that we should measure the outcomes, not necessarily the process. The process should be something very important in terms of ministries. Each of them should be really be aware about how the processes are going on, but also the private sectors should be very aware about this. But from our point of view, control room, we will measure the outcomes, and the outcomes are represented by the indicators of the fair and sustainable well-being, which is the project which I mentioned before. Okay,
thanks a lot to all of you. Now a brief summary in 5 words. 5 words, Lanza, Alessandro, India and democracy, stuck in my mind. The second, interconnection in the MED Mastroianni of the physical links. I'm thinking about the gas, the green line, the green stream, and the Algerian gas line. 3, flexibility, Massimo Mondazzi. I learned the importance of flexibility of the oil and gas company. private sector, the private, the Luca d'Agnese, the richness there is in the private sector, Cassa Depositi e Prestiti wants to keep and exploit. And 5, measure quality citizenships, Maggino. Very interesting and meaningful speaks. Now it's up to Monica Spada, and then she will come back to me, and then we will have a short presentation for Ravenna next year. Thank you. Monica.
Thank you, Davide. Good afternoon, and thank you for the excellent conduct of this final episode of our Renewable Energy Med Conference 2020. Thank you also to the distinguished panelists who have contributed so generously to today's session, leaving us with plenty of interesting insights. And I want to take this opportunity also to thank all the panelists who have joined our series of webinars since July. We really missed, of course, networking with all of you in person during this year, but we are hugely grateful of all of our attendees for supporting us to this unprecedented edition of REN 2020. Of course, at the beginning of the year, no one of us would ever imagine that the world would witness such a huge attack to our health. On the contrary, looking at our business, we were all focused on our plans to proceed on the energy transition path as a result of a growing awareness about climate change. Today, as the pandemic is still far from being over, we don't know how long we will have to deal with its disruptive impacts. We've heard today from Fondazione Enrico Mattei what the recent World Energy Outlook presented. They showed that different future scenarios prospecting a recovery to pre-crisis levels between 2023 and 2025. This crisis is probably accelerating the structural changes in the strategic orientation of companies and investors, but probably with energy demand drop and ongoing price volatility, it will be hard work finding the necessary investment to develop projects. The International Energy Agency forecasts an 18% decrease of energy investment, while the sustainable path would require additional capex of 1 trillion a year between 2021 and 2023. So today's crisis, can we say, represent a setback for efforts to bring about a more secure and sustainable energy system, or a catalyst to accelerate the pace of change. Many uncertainties remain, and crucial policy decisions have still to be made in order to face what is a really complex situation. So we have to stop and recover from the pandemic, granting health, which is of course our priority, contain and deal with the huge economic damages left behind. We have to be resilient while finding measure and solution to help the industry out of crisis, and to continue the energy transition path while ensuring energy security both on regional and global level. So within this framework, I believe that events like the Mediterranean Conference and exhibition of Ravenna can have an important role and act as a catalyst for a wider awareness about energy future and the energy transition we want to build. The OMC conference in over 25 years has grown to become the leading event in the Med region for energy insights, with particular emphasis at the beginning on the upstream sector. In more recent years, OMC has started to approach other forms of energy, from renewables, energy efficiency, waste, low carbon economy, as we've shown also during our live session, during our webinars, with the scope to increase the awareness about the needed complementarity of all energy sources. More and more energy companies have committed to reducing or eliminating emissions in the medium long term and flight climate change. To achieve this target, they're massively investing in technologies to adapt energy transition, as well as adopting a new business model to combine economic and environmental and social sustainability. In this new scenario, we want to offer a wider perspective, expanding the OMC horizon. The 15th edition aims to discuss the challenge of the energy transition, starting from the path that the oil and gas industry has started last decade towards a low carbon energy mix, with a more holistic perspective, enlarging the boundaries of its activities, including different sources of energy, and with a more diversified energy player selection. For this reason, the Offshore Mediterranean Conference 2021 is now the MED conference and no longer the Offshore Conference. The selected theme is Rethinking Energy Together, Alliances for a Sustainable Energy Future. Sounds even more challenging in the current COVID environment, as it embraces a dual challenge: accelerate with energy transition to go sustainably, and be resilient to overcome the economic downturn in the short term. How can we manage? The response comes from innovation and technology breakthrough, digitalization, new business model, but in our opinion is most of all network and alliances. Creating alliances among a different group of energy, working together on aligned goals and finding a solution will be key to reverse the economic downturn. Alliances along the entire value chain can become strategical to enable companies to produce lower carbon emission, enhance efficiency, boost performance, and remain competitive. In fact, we believe that no single solution to such important challenges exists, but a set of paths to be built and tested together. This is why we believe the key is to focus more and more on partnership between energy operators, contractors, institutions, and consumers. Our ambition is to give new impetus to the event, considering it a place for discussion and a catalyst for collaboration to convey a positioning of the industry towards the common objectives. And OMC can also foster the discussion about synergistic business development strategies to connect south and the north of MED's energy business players. So to realize this ambition, some changes were necessary to accompany this transformation that will take place gradually based on the legacy that the Offshore Med Conference and the Renewable Energy Med Conference left us. So first of all, we changed, as mentioned, the name in order to target all forms of energy and to be more inclusive. Secondly, we diversify the composition of the program committee to take in new competencies. Today, 1/3 of the OMC 2021 committee reflects the new thematic areas involved in the energy transition process. The diversity within the committee will represent our strengths, and we provide more comprehensive vision, which is essential to broaden the conference content and to properly address the challenges of sustainable energy. Thirdly, the exhibition. Coming now to the exhibition, our goal is to enlarge and diversify the exhibition portfolio of OMC exhibitor, addressing companies from the new segment of the energy business. Just to give you some numbers about 2019, last year we reached over 30,000 meters of space, more than 600 exhibiting companies from 33 countries, and a total of more than 23,000 participants. Our exhibition team is contacting companies from new sector that are joining OMC 2021, and our traditional exhibitors are focused on presenting their new activities, products, and expertise applied to new technologies. Going to the conference, we had more strategic session. We will have an opening and a closing plenary, as well as panel session every day with a broad participation of energy authorities, policymakers, CEOs, and international institutions, debating on strategies and new business model to face long-term challenges in the energy industry, levers to evolve the upstream sector towards a net zero future, and we want to focus the attention also on the debates regarding carbon capture and sequestration, alliances between the North and the South Med to accelerate the transition, and investment and policy needs for a low carbon energy system. The technical session will be organized in 4 thematic areas, together with operational excellence, which is more focused on upstream activities. We added 3 other sessions more focused on carbon neutrality, circular economy, and technologies, offering experts the opportunity to get insights on all aspects of their area of competence. And finally, the Innovation Room, which is an absolute novelty that will host a series of workshops and initiatives to address university and school to attract and get them involved in the energy transition. Just a few examples on the events we are working on. An event with startups to share innovative ideas and facilitate cooperation and network with energy companies and young resources. An energy hackathon to gather brilliant minds to find solution ideas and projects relating to the 2050 goals, and a call for ideas for MED challenges addressing North African companies and university on what they think about their preparing for the energy transition. And finally, a school competition to stimulate the young generation to present their vision about energy mobility and climate change. So we are working to facilitate dialogue on the complexity on the energy issues, and we will put all our effort and enthusiasm to organize a more inclusive OMC 2021. So please keep on following us. Thank you, everybody, and hope to see you in Ravenna at OMC 2021 next May.
Okay, grazie Monica, very interesting, your presentation. Briefly, we are going to see a short video, stay on. The other point, you have to come to Ravenna next year for 3 reasons. First, offshore Mediterranean, the conference. Second, the celebration that I've already started of Dante, the writer, the poet who wrote the Divina Commedia, and he died 700 years ago. And further, Ravenna is a wonderful town. I recommend you this book. I've just bought. I didn't read it. I have several quotes I wanted to read you, but what it is enough, the title, Capital of an Empire and Crucible of Europe. Crucible. Of course, we have to look ahead. Ravenna is a wonderful town, was a capital. We can pretend we can have this ambitious target to do something for this transition. And this conference of today, and especially that of the next year, is a small step in this direction. Thank you, and see you in Ravenna.